There is a saying in Mondstadt that the wind carries one's spirit back to Mondstadt should you die in a place where the wind blows. They say that the Animo Archon Barbatos watches over your soul and guides you on your journey to the afterlife. And that's what we'll be covering today, because I want to discuss the theory of Venti being the god of death, or at least the god closest to death. Disclaimer: this is all just a theory and speculation, and mostly a deeper analysis into Barbatos' role in the overall grander story of Teyvat's world. To be honest, it's not really a theory with any concrete arguments, but rather a retrospective analysis into Barbatos. This video came about as a result of the How Strong Are the Archons video, and it's basically the extra findings. This video was also inspired by other mythologies and literary pieces that I found during my search. I couldn't necessarily add these bits into the original video, so I decided to create a mini-theory. Or really, a mini-analysis of Animo. So with that out of the way, let's begin with Animo's connections with death. The connection of the wind and death has been a literary motif even before Genshin Impact. One can never outrun the wind, the same way one can never truly escape death. Death comes with the wind, fleeting, transient, and swift. The poem The Wind of Death by Ethelwyn Wetherald, who describes death as soft, tender, and silent. The wind of death that slowly blows, the last warm petal from the rose, the last dry leaf from off the tree, tonight has come to breathe on me. However, what I will describe as death for today's video isn't necessarily just death as a concept, but also death as a process, loss and acceptance. What I will refer to as death is the two sides of the same coin, the loss of a loved one and the acceptance of change. The biggest connection of Animo to death is that the wind takes, but it also guides. It guides kindred spirits to a peace beyond death and helps those burdened by grief and sorrow to find a tomorrow. If we look at the roster of Animo characters, there is a presence of death in most of their stories. The loss of comrades, the loss of those who accepted him, the loss of a friend, a loss due to misunderstanding, and loss due to time. There are also those that drifted away from their companions, whether by choice or by circumstance. As for its more concrete connections with death, the wind is also responsible for guiding the souls back to Mondstadt should they perish. According to Venti's story quest, no adventurer should die in a place where the wind doesn't blow. An adventurer named Stanley once died in the Mare Jivari, a windless, empty space. As such, his spirit lingered, unable to return to Mondstadt. Now we continue this with the potential symbolism that Venti holds as the god of death. I want to further contextualize this by actually defining what I mean by such a god. A god of death doesn't just mean a god of bloodshed or war, but also can be the guide that leads the souls to the afterlife. A more peaceful interpretation of this is the eternal slumber, the death who comforts after a long endeavor of life. If Venti were to represent death, he would be the god who comforts those in peril. For example, Hu Tao regards death as a constant of life that makes it precious. She finds that death is nothing short of comfort after the hardships of life, and life's meaning comes because it is fleeting. Barbatos as a god has been seen claiming the soul of Stanley during his story quest to assist Hans in moving on. There are also NPCs who state that the Animo Archon will watch over the spirits of lost loved ones, as the souls are guided by him to the afterlife. Now, while the perception of the NPCs could just be of devotees, Venti's story is ever so shrouded in themes of death, which leads me to believe that Venti, as a character, might be related to several other mythologies that exist in real life. I'd absolutely love to thank Noxus or Archaic Lord on Twitter for bringing this up when I posted about Venti as a god of death. Noxus mentioned that Venti has a parallel with the Greek god Hermes, the herald of the gods. Genshin Impact has a thread of Greek mythologies and inspirations when it comes to gods, so the prospect of them taking from the Greek pantheon isn't really out of the blue. Hermes is a god known for his skill in the use of speech and had the eloquence of a trickster. Hermes was a god of prudence and skill in social intercourse, and was cunning in both actions and words. Tying this back to Venti, Venti is absolutely known as a god of trickery and deceit, as his character stories have shown that he has a knack for embellishing stories and even forging Zhongli's signature. Hermes is also a great inventor and was said to create the lyre. But what's actually fascinating about Hermes is that he plays the role of a psychopomp or soul guide, a conductor of souls into the afterlife. Psychopomps are supernatural spirits whose responsibility is to escort newly deceased souls, and they often appear in funerary arts. Noxus also points out that Hermes has ties with the Animoi, the four wind spirits that are assigned to the different cardinal directions. Their Roman counterparts are known as Venti. According to the Greek epic poet Quintus Marneus, Hermes called upon the Animoi as they burnt the corpse of the hero Achilles during his funeral. I quote, "They darted, roared beneath them as they flew. The sea, the land, above crashed thunder-voiced, clouds headlong hurtling through the firmament, then by decree of Zeus down on the pyre." But if I were to relate Venti to the prospect of death directly, I also believe that Venti has parallels to the twins of the night, Thanatos and Hypnos. The two gods are sons of the goddess of night Nyx, and eventually became the minor personifications of what we mortals refer to as the eternal slumber. A really interesting fun fact is that Thanatos actually has overlaps with Hermes when it comes to the role of guiding souls to the afterlife. Because Thanatos and Hypnos weren't gods per se, but rather daimons, which were unnamed divine creatures that represented the more abstract concepts in life, such as greed, love, misery, etc. Thanatos had several strange interpretations. Because death was such a difficult subject, others saw him as a merciless equalizer, but others saw him as the peaceful version of death, mostly because they credited the violent version of death to Keres. So what ended up happening was that Thanatos personified the gentle touch of death. Poets tried to steer away from the prospect of death being displeasing. Paean, or the healing, was the name used to describe Thanatos, who was perceived as delivering men from the pains and sorrows of life. On the other hand, Hypnos was a softer figure, who dwelled with the mortals in peace. Hypnos came with the night and left by the day. Venti, having ties to both of them rather than just one, would further contextualize the kind of mellow god he presents. Furthermore, Venti has ties to slumber and rest, as we've seen him multiple times take long periods of sleep after important events in Mondstadt. Why he goes to sleep is actually unknown, but a popular theory is that he does so because he's preserving himself from erosion, and his awakening is simply because of a preordained fate or the prayers of the people that require his intervention. But by no means is Venti a pacifistic god. He has had his fair share of trials and tribulations, allegedly being involved with the Conrayan incident 500 years ago. Another cool connection that Venti has with sleep is this scene in the manga, where he arrives at the dead of night to converse with Vanessa. It's unknown though if Venti was able to put the guards to sleep as he was singing a melody prior to his arrival, but we know that Venti has an extensive knowledge of lullabies and melodies. We also know that Venti's songs can have a calming effect on creatures, as we've seen him assist with Xiao's karma. The extent of this power, though, is unknown, but I want to connect the discussion of Venti being a god of death with the post-mortem that Venti also represents, the legacy of the lost, or acceptance of those who have passed. Venti's characterization and role as a bard has heavy emphasis on remembering someone beyond the grave. He writes songs about them and weaves their names into ballads to carry their legacy with the wind. The wind is also known to carry seeds of stories which bloom over time. Venti holds the legacies of the nameless bard and Vanessa to the highest regard. Bennett actually provides great context for this, stating that death is a way for adventurers to be remembered because they'll be singing songs about their history after their death. As the god of death, Venti would also represent guiding those towards acceptance, or comforting those left behind. In the Mondstadt Archon quest, Venti's words of comfort for Dvalin when we first see him interacting with the dragon was comforting him that he was here, because Dvalin believed that at the time, Venti and Mondstadt had abandoned him. Venti also assisted Kazuha in finding the truth of the Kadahara family's decline, as well as helping Xiao with his karmic debt. Venti also stated that the winds will help the traveler on their journey, and have been a constant presence in several nations throughout the events. Venti is also the god with the strangest connection to the goddess of time, Istaroth, which leads us back to the idea of Venti being a god of death. Death in Genshin Impact is not final. As a concept, the developers have stated that those who die leave remnants and are never fully gone. Perhaps that's Venti's place in this world. someone that watches over the people and guides them both in life and in death. He understands the weight of loss and serves as a comforter, a god that you can just relax in a tavern with or pray your troubles away. To be free in this regard is to live life without the lingering sense of dread or regret. But that's it from me today. A retrospective analysis into Venti's fascinating role as an overseer of souls and unbound hearts. Animo to me is such a fascinating element because of all its underlying themes, and we know how Genshin loves their bigger-than-life concepts that just hidden away in obscure lore bits. But honestly, this topic is by no means complete or even factual. Just another subjective analysis of a character that has given us so much difficulty in deciphering. And I think that's the beauty of Venti. Venti is such a jack of all trades that really pinning him down to one simple concept just wouldn't do him justice. His many sides and layers are just too difficult to decipher. But yes, my name is Aster and thank you so much for chilling with me. May the wind lead. Fun fact, the reason I even know about the Animoi in Greek mythology was because I accidentally fat-fingered Animo and got an extra eye. Also, I've been binging overly sarcastic productions and I am absolutely in love with gods and divine creatures. Their presentation is just so addicting. Actually, I've been watching them for over a few years now. Anyway, this video was also because I'm gonna cosplay Venti for a convention and I was just super inspired. So yeah, see ya!